Hello and welcome to Wingin It, and welcome to part 3 of Teal or No Teal, the series in which I take an in-depth look at the Teal powers in Wingspan's European expansion, giving my thoughts on each of them, my tips and tricks on how to best use them, so that hopefully you can maximise the potential of these birds in your next game of Wingspan. In the first two parts of this series so far, we have taken a look at the Teal Pabs that let you play another bird, and then also those Teal powers that let you tuck cards and cash food at the end of the round. So if you've not seen those first two parts, I'd recommend going and checking those two out now. But here in part 3, we're going to be taking a look at the egg-laying birds. So yeah, there are 4 of these birds, and kind of as suggested, they are going to let you lay eggs at the end of the round, depending on certain criteria being met. So yeah, as with the other birds that we've looked at in this series, I'm going to go through each of them in turn, talk about how they work, look at some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses, some of the situations where they work well or where they don't work quite so well, and then wrap up with my final thoughts on each of them, and yeah, tell you which ones you should be looking out for and maybe which ones you should look to avoid in general. We will start off here by taking a look at the 2 identical powers in the set of 4 egg-laying birds, being the black redstart and the lesser whitethroat. So how do these birds work? Well, the round end power is pretty straightforward here. Choose a habitat with no eggs and lay 1 egg on each bird in that habitat. So you're going to be getting eggs at the end of the round, depending on which habitat you choose and depending on how many birds there are in that habitat. Taking a look at some of the strengths of these birds, it kind of goes without saying, but eggs are worth points. So if you can get some eggs at the round end, that is going to help you out by scoring points at the end of the game, but also if you're going to be looking to play birds in those earlier rounds, having some eggs down in between the rounds can be very useful, particularly in the early game. So if you can get one of these birds down in round 1 and get yourself a couple of free eggs, very, very powerful. And of course, as the power kind of suggests, you are going to be getting more eggs with more birds in each habitat. So yeah, if you can potentially be looking at filling 1 or more of your habitats as the game progresses, and then in that round 3 or round 4, getting 5 eggs each time as a huge point bomb that you can be getting passively through these birds at the end of the round. So definite strengths there. Getting lots of birds down is going to help get you lots of eggs. So lots of points on offer here if you can use these teal powers effectively. And these definitely do work well in those situations where you don't necessarily have a strong grasslands game going, because of course here you need a habitat with no eggs in. So for starters, you're probably not going to want to be laying eggs too many times with your actions each round, because that is potentially going to be looking at filling up some of those habitats and reducing the number of eggs that you could be getting from these powers. But yeah, these powers do definitely help out in that regard. If you're not going for the grasslands, I think you can probably just rely on these as your egg source. And of course, in those first few rounds, looking at using those eggs to play extra birds, and then in round 3 and particularly in round 4, just look at them as a huge point bomb late in the game, getting loads of eggs down. And of course, eggs are worth points, so that is what we like to see in a game of Wingspan. So while the strengths of these birds might be a little bit more obvious, I think the drawbacks are potentially a little bit more subtle here. So one of them here being that you do need habitat with no eggs, and if you're laying eggs in each round in those habitats, you are going to have to clear out those eggs in order to maximize off the potential of these birds again. So I think particularly if you do have a habitat with 4 or 5 birds in it, if you are laying eggs on all of those birds, if you want to use that habitat again in the next round, you've got to get a move on. You've got to be playing birds, or perhaps discarding eggs to draw more cards, or maybe discarding eggs through a brown power bird that you have got in one of your habitats in order to clear out those egg spaces. Because yeah, if you don't have any habitats at the end of the round with no eggs in them, you're not going to be able to activate this power. So yeah, you kind of have 2 options. You either focus really heavily on one habitat and try and clear out the egg spaces each round, or you try and look to have 2 or more habitats with lots of birds in them so that you have multiple options at the end of each round. But of course, that comes with its own challenges. Playing that many birds and filling up that many habitats at the same time, it can definitely be a challenge. Another drawback that is worth considering and worth flagging is that these birds are quite expensive. So I think particularly that black redstart, 3 food for a 0-point bird at the start of the game, it's a big investment. We all know that resource access early on in the game of Wingspan is crucial. So if you can't necessarily get the food in order to be able to play this bird and then also play other birds, because let's face it, with this power, you are going to need and want to be playing additional birds in habitats to really get extra eggs. Being able to play that many birds early on, as well as these powers, it can really be a challenge. So Whitethroat has that issue, maybe not quite to such a great extent, only costing 2 food, and it can go in the forest. So that can sometimes help out as the first or even second bird that you put down in your forest to be able to get a bit more food going and let you play birds. So yeah, a little bit expensive, always worth considering whether you can afford this bird or whether it's going to be able to fit into your general strategy in order to get the maximum potential of the eggs from this power. So all in all, are these birds worth playing? Well, I think as with a lot of things in Wingspan, it does depend on what you're doing elsewhere. As I said, if you're not going for a strong grasslands game, if you're looking to get lots of food and play lots of big point birds, I think these are a great addition to that sort of engine, because you don't have to worry about spending turns laying eggs. You can just wait for the end of the round to come around. You're going to get 2, 3, maybe even 4 eggs from these kind of birds, and that can really help you out. Saving those turns, not laying eggs, and then also giving yourself additional eggs to be playing birds in each round. I think one key thing to consider with these birds is when can you play them and when can you get that benefit. As I said, looking at some of those strengths, if you can get those couple of eggs maybe in that first round, that could be a real time saver. However, I would say that these can still be worth playing as late as round 2 or even round 3. I think a very typical usage curve for these kind of birds would look like getting 2 eggs in the first round, 3 eggs in round 2, 4 eggs in round 3, and then hopefully the maximum of 5 eggs in that round 4. Obviously, as Wingspan develops through your game, you're going to be looking at filling up those habitats a bit more, and I would certainly expect, if you're going for this kind of strategy, in that 4th round, you can look at maxing out 1 of your habitats and getting the full 5 eggs. So yeah, I think pretty typical usage. If you can get this down round 1, you'd be looking at 14 eggs, which, you know, only 0 points for the bird. Obviously not great there, but if you can potentially be getting 14 eggs, 14 more points, and save yourself turns and not having to lay eggs throughout the game, that's another thing to consider. And yeah, definitely can be worth going for. But as I say, if it's only 2 or only 3 in those first couple of rounds, if you play this in round 3 and you can still get 9 eggs from it, maybe even 10 if you do have already a filled habitat or 2 in that 3rd round, yeah, that can definitely be worth it. And it's going to be a calculation worth doing and an option worth considering if you do get this bird as you go into the late game. If I have to pick a favourite of the 2, it's going to be that lesser Whitethroat. As I said, looking at some of those drawbacks, Black Redstart, it is just that little bit too expensive. The Star Nest is nice, so if it fits for a bonus card, or maybe you've got multiple end of round goals that are to do with a different nest type, it can be handy. But 3 food, definitely off-putting, and I think the Whitethroat, just for 2 food, and being able to put that in the forest and just increase your food production early on in the game, that can be very, very important. So yeah, not the kind of birds that I would always look to go for. They are situational, but as I say, being able to recognize those situations where I'm not going for a grasslands engine, maybe you're going for some kind of food production engine where you're going to be playing lots of big point birds and filling up some habitats. That is where these birds really shine, and that is where I'd look to go for this Whitethroat in particular and get lots and lots of points. The next egg-laying bird that we're going to be taking a look at here is the common Goldeneye. So again, an egg-laying bird, but with a slightly different criteria to those we have already looked at. So yeah, this time you're going to be laying eggs at the round end, 1 on the common Goldeneye for each other bird with a cavity nest that you have. So where does this bird work well? Well, I think pretty obviously, if you're going to get a lot of cavity nests down, that is where this bird can really shine. If you're going for a forest engine, we know plenty of those birds if we're looking at chickadees or nuthatches, or the classic forest engine bird being the wood duck. Those all have cavity nests, so if you can get lots of those down and then add a common Goldeneye to the equation, that kind of fulfills exactly what you're looking for. You need some extra eggs often when you're going for a forest engine, and if you've already got all those cavity nests down, this can be a really great addition. Of course, if you've also got Nest Box Builder, this can be a really nice way to supplement that bonus card. Ordinarily, you'd already be looking to get 4 birds down for 4 points, or even maxing out that bonus card with 6 cavity nesting birds. So yeah, if you can get a nice synergy going there with the bonus card, get lots of cavity nest birds down, get points from your bonus card, but then also get some extra eggs through the common Goldeneye at the round end. That can be a real nice strength of this bird to look to exploit. Again, as with the Black Redstart and the lesser Whitethroat, I think it is worth considering here how many eggs you can expect to get through each round. So for sure in round 1, I think probably 1 is what you're looking at most. It's quite difficult to get that many birds down in round 1. And with the common Goldeneye, you've got to remember it doesn't count itself. It's every other cavity nesting bird that you have. So you need the common Goldeneye, and then you need at least 1 other cavity nesting bird in order to get that extra egg at the round end. So yeah, I think generally my rule of thumb for this kind of bird is 1 egg per round that you're in. So in round 1, I think you can expect 1 egg. You've probably only got 1 cavity nest down. And then in round 2, you've probably got 2, round 3, 3, and then round 4 really is probably where you can expect to max it out. Now, of course, there are going to be other situations. As I say, if you do have Nest Box Builder, or maybe there's an end of round goal that requires eggs in a cavity nest, you might work a little bit harder and you might be able to max this out as early as round 3 or even round 2. So there is definitely potential for more eggs here, but as I say, I think 1 per each round number that you're in, 1, 2, 3, and then 4. So if you can get this down round 1, potentially maxing out at 10 eggs. But again, as with those other 2 birds, even if you play this as late as round 2 or even round 3, you can still get a good chunk of eggs from this. So yeah, it's situational. It's all going to depend on what you've got down, but yeah, there are definitely some strengths to this kind of bird, getting those free eggs at the round end. So having gone through the strengths there, we can take a look now at some of the potential weaknesses of this bird. And I think one of them is pretty obvious. If you don't have cavity nest birds, you're not going to be getting eggs from this. So yeah, it is one of those birds where it's best played once you've already kind of developed some kind of engine going, maybe in the forest. As I said, if you've got quite a few cavity nests down, you can add this bird into that, and you've already done the hard work getting the cavity nests down. I find it's a lot harder with this bird to work it the other way around. Playing this bird and then digging desperately, hoping that you can find cavity nest birds is really not the way to go. That's definitely a risk that you're going to be taking. Playing this bird, if you don't find the cavity nests, you're not going to get any eggs, and ultimately this is just going to be an expensive bird you've got down 2 food for only 2 points. So yeah, you really do need the eggs if you're going to be playing this. Another thing worth considering here with this bird is that you have to lay the eggs on the bird itself, and you only have 4 egg spaces to work with. So that can definitely be an issue, I think, particularly as you get into the later game, going from round 3 into round 4. If you've already filled up this bird from round 3 and you've already got 4 eggs on it, and you're looking to maximize with another 4 eggs at the end of round 4, that can be very, very tricky. Of course, you only have 5 turns to work with in round 4. So really you'd be looking to play 2 or maybe sometimes even 3 birds to try and clear out these egg spaces in order to actually get the benefit from that. So sometimes that can fit seamlessly into your strategy. If you're able to plan around that, then that's really good because you can get those birds down and clear out the egg spaces. But sometimes I do find it's a bit of a distraction, and I'm almost forcing myself to play birds that I otherwise wouldn't really have wanted to play, just so that I can clear out the egg space here and get those extra eggs. So definitely a drawback that is worth considering. You are sometimes going to be forced in that round 4 to do things you wouldn't want to do just to be able to get those eggs. But again, if you are able to do this seamlessly and not have to work too much around it, you are getting those 4 free eggs potentially. And of course, 4 free eggs is worth 4 points at the end of the game, and that's going to help you win your next game. So 3 birds down now means we have just 1 more to look at in this video. And last but by no means least here, we have the Dunnock. So how does this bird work? Well, choose 1 other player, and for each action cube on their grasslands, you lay 1 egg on this bird. So similar to some of the other powers that we've looked at in previous parts of this series, such as the Hooded Crow and the Eurasian Magpie, you're going to be potentially getting some extra points here as a counter to an opponent laying eggs in their grasslands. So what's the real strength of this bird? Well, it is exactly that. It is that counter to the grasslands engine. So again, as we talked before with those previous teal powers, they do work very similarly to some of the pink powers that we have in the base game. And the Dunnock is even more similar to those powers because you are getting free eggs for each time your opponents lay eggs. So yeah, as with those previous powers, we compared it to something like a cowbird or a cuckoo or a Goldeneye that we know from the base game where you're getting those free eggs. And yeah, this is very similar in that you are getting those free eggs. So if you can see early on, maybe even into round 2, if your opponent is going for a grasslands engine and you can get this bird down, you're just getting 3 points, you're leeching points away from their engine. And yeah, that's going to be really good. Just put this down. It will score points on its own. You can worry about doing other things and know you're going to get a nice little return of eggs at the end of the round. Now, another strength of this bird, and particularly over some of those pink powers, is that you can get it in at the end of the round and still get points for previous turns where your opponent has laid eggs. So of course, with those pink powers, they trigger on the turn that your opponent lays eggs. So if you want to be getting benefit from that, you want to be getting that down straight away, maybe even turn 1 of a game, or certainly early on in a round, and try and catch your opponent off guard and really, yeah, get their eggs for free as they are laying eggs. However, with this bird, you can sneakily get it in at a round end, and maybe your opponent isn't expecting it. Maybe they've already laid eggs 3 or 4 times, quite happily knowing that you haven't got your cowbird down or some other pink power. But then you can get this down on the last turn of the round, and it's too late for them to do anything about it. You've already got your points, and if they've already committed to that engine, you're going to continue getting points throughout future rounds. So that can be a nice little benefit, and certainly if there's an end of round goal, particularly eggs in a bowl nest or eggs in the forest, you can very easily sneak an end of round goal win here, catch your opponents off guard, and get even more points than just those 4 points from the eggs. So yeah, something worth considering. There are some little situations there where this bird does work even better than it can already otherwise do. Of course, as with these other birds, while there are strengths, there are definitely going to be some weaknesses and some situations where this doesn't work quite so well. And similar to the common Goldeneye, the big one here is that you only have 4 egg spaces on this bird. So yeah, if your opponents are laying eggs more than 4 times, tough luck, you're only getting 4 eggs. You've only got those 4 spaces to work with, and yeah, similar to that Goldeneye, you're going to have to work hard clearing those egg spaces out in between the rounds to make sure that you can benefit from the power again in the following round. So yeah, end of round 3, if this bird is full, you've only got those 5 turns to work with in round 4, trying to clear the spaces out so that you can maximize off this again in round 4 and get those extra points. And it can be tricky. It can definitely be something that catches you out if you're not prepared for it. So worth considering, worth bearing in mind. It can be quite tricky sometimes clearing out those egg spaces. The other main drawback for me is very similar to what we talked about in the previous part looking at the hooded crow and the Eurasian magpie, and that is you don't know how many times your opponents are going to lay eggs. And certainly if you play this too early, before your opponents have committed one way or the other, you can really put them off. Maybe they switch it up and go for the forest or the wetlands, and then this bird is just going to sit there and not get you any points. So yeah, definitely one that I would hold off, wait and see what my opponent's doing. Again, maybe not look at playing it round 1, maybe even wait until round 2 once they've already picked the grasslands as their chosen strategy, and then you can get this down and maybe get some free eggs. But yeah, definitely is a risk, and again, 2 food, just 1 point, such a heavy reliance here on the power getting you those points as the game goes on, and if you can't get many eggs from it, it's probably not going to have been a great play. So there we go, that was an in-depth look at the 4 egg-laying powers from the Teal power set in Wingspan's European expansion. And yeah, if I had to pick a favourite here, it's probably going to be that lesser Whitethroat. I think that's the one I generally play the most. It's the one that gets the most action from me, and it definitely has some fun synergies with the other Teal powers that we will take a look at later in this series as well. So hopefully you found that useful, and in your next game of Wingspan, you'll be able to recognise when these birds come up. You'll be able to weigh up these pros and cons, make an effective decision on whether they are the right bird to play or not. So thank you very much for watching. As I said at the start, this is part 3 of Teal or No Teal, where I will be taking an in-depth look at all of the Teal powers in the European expansion. So if you want to see the future parts of this series, please do hit that subscribe button so you get notified when they come out. And yeah, plenty more content coming your way on this channel, so do stick around and stay tuned for that.